How do you resolve scope services in a background task? If we have a look in this background service, we're injecting a scoped and transient service lifetime using the constructor's parameters. If we have a look in program.cs, these have been successfully registered with dependency injection, but we run into issues when we run the application. It comes up with this exception saying cannot consume scope service. That must mean there's an issue with the scope service, so we're going to remove that. When a category transient service is initialized, it sets the date stamp to the UTC time that it is now. We go back to the worker service. When it executes, as long as the cancellation hasn't been requested, it will output the date stamp and then delay the task by a second before doing it again. But the date stamp is always the same, meaning that the transient service lifetime is acting like a singleton lifetime. Before we show you how to use scoped or transient service lifetimes in a background task, remember to subscribe to the channel and leave a like for the video. And let me know in the YouTube comments how you use dependency injection in a background task. Now let's have a look to see how we can add scoped and transient service lifetimes into a background task. First, we inject the iService scope factory type into the constructor's parameter and then store a reference to it in a private read-only field. Afterwards, we can create our new scope. We do that by calling the service scope factory and create scope. If we don't want to use the curly braces, we can remove them. We remove the brackets around there and just add a semicolon like that. If you're using the iAsync disposable interface, you can dispose of your methods asynchronously, in which case you'll want to create an async scope. You add the await directive there, and you just change this to create async scope. If you're not using the curly braces for the using statement, the scope will be valid throughout this block statement. You can download the code example for this tutorial by going to roundthecode.com/examples. There's also a link for it in the YouTube video description. We've now created a scope. The next step is to start injecting services with that scope. We're going to inject the category scoped and category transient services using the scope that we just created. To do that, we call our scope instance and we get the service provider, and we can either call get service or get required service. Get service returns null if the service hasn't been registered, whereas get required service returns an exception. We're going to use get required service and we're going to get our instance of the category scope service. And we'll also do the same for the transient as well. We'll copy and paste that. We're just going to change the type to iCategory transient service. The category scope service is doing exactly the same thing as the category transient service. When it's initialized, it sets the date stamp to the time it is now in UTC. We're going to output the date stamp for the category scoped and category transient references that we've got within our worker service. So we'll output it to the console. So we'll get the scoped.datestamp, and we'll do the same for the transient as well. We're only going to output the times for the date stamp. We've also added a second delay. Let's run the background service. So every time it's running, it's outputting a different time, meaning our scoped and transient service lifetimes are working as they should do. And that is because the scope service lifetime is creating a new instance every time a new scope is created, and the transient service lifetime creates a new instance every time it's injected. You can also do the same for keyed services. We've added a keyed service with a transient service lifetime. It has a key of computers, and the implementation is category computer storage service. This class is doing exactly the same thing as the other classes, where it's storing the date stamp. We'll now use this within our worker service. We'll create a reference to it. We'll call it keyed, and for this, we either call the get keyed service or the get required keyed service. We're going to call the get required keyed service. We'll get a reference to the service, which is the iCategory storage service, and we also need to specify the key. Then we can output the date stamp and see if it's going to resolve for us. And we can do that by running the background service, and it's outputting 3 times. It's not just background services where you need to create a new scope. If you're using multi-threading, it's essential that you create a new scope for each thread. Let's find out why that is. We've created a new di-async method and it's passing in a task as a parameter. We're creating a new scope on the service scope factory type, and then we're getting the iCategory scope service from that scope. We're outputting the task number and also the date stamp from the scope service. Now we're going to call that in 3 separate threads at the same time, and we're going to wait until all of them are completed before we return the no content response here. So we call task.whenAll. We wrap it around with square brackets so it's an array. We're going to call it 3 times. So we'll call di-async with a task number of 1, do the same for 2, and also for 3. We've run that API endpoint and it's outputted a 204 no content response. If we have a look at the console logs, it's outputted the date stamp 3 times, meaning that each of those threads has run. But what happens if we use the same scope for each of the threads? To demonstrate that, we're going to create a new parameter. We're going to pass in the iService scope instance into here. And because of that, we don't need that instance. We can move that up to the multithreads method. And we're passing the scope instance for each of the tasks that we're running. I'm going to change this to task when any. So when any of these tasks are completed, it will throw to the no content response. We're also going to add a delay before we resolve the iCategory scope service. We create a new instance of random. And we're going to generate a random value, a random number of seconds to delay the task. So we call random.next and we'll do it between 1 and 5 seconds. We then call task.delay, call time span from seconds, and then we get our random seconds value and put it in there. We can remove that and run the application. So we've run our API endpoint method. It's returned a 204 no content response. Well, if we have a look at the console, it's only outputted 1 time. If we have a look in the code, because we're sharing the same scope, it's going to be disposed of when the first one is returned. So if this value is different, before it gets to this bit of code, the scope would have already been disposed, meaning it's not going to work. There are some of the examples as to why you'd want to create a new scope. And you might be interested in unit testing your services. Watch this video next to find out how you do that. You can download the code example for this tutorial by going to roundthecode.com/examples. There's also a link for it in the YouTube video description. Leave any comments that you have about creating a new scope, and I'll see you on the next video.